So which of these action cameras is the best one for you? So maybe you're in the market for one of these great cameras, but maybe you aren't sure exactly which one is the best one for you. By the end of this video today, you're going to be in a much better position to answer that question and hopefully get a camera that you will love and not regret. So the four cameras that I have here today are the GoPro Hero 12, the DJI Osmo Action 4, the Insta360 Ace Pro, and the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. All four of these cameras at the time of filming this video were released during the past 6 months. I purchased all four of these cameras with my own money. None of these cameras were provided to me. I bought them all. Over the past several months, I've used each of these cameras on many adventures. So I've had a lot of experience with these four cameras, and I have a pretty good idea of where they shine and where they don't. So I'll be going through a bunch of use cases and different scenarios today, and I've created a full table of contents at the bottom of this video to make it easier for you to navigate those. So first of all, let's talk about the price of each of these cameras. The GoPro Hero 12 goes for $399, but if you are a GoPro subscriber, you can get this camera for $299. The DJI Osmo Action 4 goes for $299 for the standard combo. The Insta360 Ace Pro is $449.99, and the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 is $519, but if you get the creator combo, it's an extra $150 and will cost you $669. Now we'll talk about that creator combo for the Pocket 3 a little bit later on, but I do consider it a great value, especially if you want to do vlogging with this camera, so I'll talk all about that in a little bit. So of these four, the Osmo Action 4 is the lowest cost of them at $299, unless you are a GoPro subscriber, in which case the Hero 12 will cost the same as the Action 4. But the lowest level GoPro subscription does cost $49 a year. So if you pay for the GoPro subscription to get the discount, technically it would be about $348 for the Hero 12. So looking at price alone, the Action 4 is the lowest price of these four cameras. Next, let's talk about the weight of each of these. Weight can be an important factor, especially if you have a very specialized use case where you need the camera to weigh less than a certain amount, such as an FPV drone or a gimbal. Anything like that, it's important to know what each of these weighs. So the Hero 12 with the battery installed weighs 153 grams. The Action 4 with the battery weighs 145 grams. The Ace Pro with the battery weighs 180 grams. And the Pocket 3 with the default battery here weighs 179 grams. All of these weights do not include some of the mounts and accessories that come with these. These are just the default factory weight with the battery installed. Adding any of those mounts or other accessories will, of course, add to the weight of these cameras. So all of these have a pretty similar weight. There's only about a 35 gram difference between the lightest and the heaviest of these. But the Action 4 is the lightest of these four cameras at 145 grams, and the Ace Pro is the heaviest at 180 grams. The next topic that's really important to understand for these four is batteries. So battery life, battery cost, battery recharge time. I'm going to go through all of that here so you have a good understanding of that. So when it comes to battery life with these four, I found that I get pretty much what I expected from them. Each of these manufacturers has a different claim on battery life, but if you read the fine print, it's usually that battery life is at a specific ambient temperature, a specific resolution in frames per second, a specific screen brightness. Do you have the Wi-Fi on? Do you have the GPS on if it's available? There's a lot of factors that go into that battery life. And what I found with each of these is they're pretty close to those approximations that are given by the companies. If I'm using the camera when it's really hot or really cold, the battery life is going to be a little bit less than the manufacturer stated. Usually the temperature that most of these companies will provide that approximation for is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's usually about the average. And that being said, I do find the estimates from the manufacturers to be pretty accurate with all of these. In other words, none of these is so bad that I would say don't buy it because the battery life is terrible. But as a general rule, I do recommend owning at least one extra battery for whatever camera you choose. That way you always have an extra battery along that's fully charged so that when your battery runs low on your adventure, you're not going to be out of commission with filming. You're going to have that battery you can just pop in and get back to work. And of course, I do also recommend having an external power bank. One of these USB-C ones right here from Anker. These are very affordable. Usually you can get them for about $35, and they have about 20,000 milliamp hours. And they have the USB-C cable that you can easily plug into any of these and give them a quick charge on the go. Some of these cameras do have very nice quick charge functionality we'll talk about in a moment, but it's good to have one of these along too, if your adventure allows for it. So the cost of getting an additional battery for each of these cameras can have quite a price variance. First of all, for the Hero 12, if you want to buy an extra battery, it's going to be $24.99 US or $19.99 if you're a GoPro subscriber. For the Action 4, an extra battery is going to cost $29. For the Ace Pro, an extra battery is going to cost $34.99. And for the Pocket 3, an additional battery, also known as the battery handle, is going to cost an extra $69. And of course, the battery handle can be gotten as part of the creator combo. That does come with that. In which case, part of that creator combo, it would be the extra $150, but you do get several other accessories as well, which I'll talk about when we get into the vlogging section. But right here is what the battery handle looks like for the Pocket 3, and it just clips into place down here at the bottom. So you get a little bit longer extension here on the Osmo Pocket 3 if you do that. So one of those statements I often hear is that GoPro accessories are expensive, and that's one of the negatives of a GoPro. And while that statement might be true of some GoPro accessories, in this case, the battery is actually the least expensive of these 4 cameras. So next, let's talk about battery charging time. That is an important consideration, especially if you're only going to have an extra battery with you and you may have to charge it on the go. It's important that the battery can charge quickly if you need it ready to go again in a short amount of time. So 3 of these 4 cameras do have a fast charging capability when charging the battery inside the camera. And those are the Action 4, the Ace Pro, and the Pocket 3. On the Action 4, you can charge a battery from 0 to 80% in 18 minutes. On the Ace Pro, you can charge a battery from 0 to 80% in 22 minutes. And on the Pocket 3, you can charge the battery from 0 to 80% in 16 minutes. Now, an important disclaimer with that fast charging is you do have to have the camera connected to a USB-C cable that is connected to a charging power source that provides that rapid delivery fast charging. So the charger does have to have a high enough wattage, or you need to have a external power bank like this one that has that fast charging port on it. If you don't have that rapid delivery fast charging port, then these cameras are not going to fast charge at the promised speed. The Hero 12 is the only one here that does not have a fast charging capability built into the camera. So if you need to plug in your Hero 12 and charge the battery in this, it's going to take quite a while to charge. I don't generally charge my GoPro batteries inside the camera because of that. I use this dual battery charger right here from GoPro, and I connect this to a USB-C cable, or I just give my GoPro a charge on the go with a power bank, or I charge a couple batteries on the go with the power bank connected to this. I find with that, I can usually charge 2 GoPro batteries in the same amount of time it would take me to charge 1 inside the camera. So if rapid battery charging is an important factor to you, you'll definitely want to consider one of these 3 cameras, as they all shine in that area. So next, let's talk about the mounts that come with these cameras. Now, if you like magnetic mounts, 2 of these cameras have almost identical mounts. The Action 4 has a magnetic mount. That mount just clips on right here on the bottom of the camera. It locks into place, and you've got the 2 feet here that hang down. And then these are, of course, available to attach to any of the base mounts where they go in with the thumb screw. The Ace Pro also has a very similar magnetic mount. You've got this little mount right here, clips into place, and then you've got the 2 feet that hang down. These are here ready to attach to any mounts that are compatible with the thumb screw. The Hero 12, so instead of having a mount that you need to connect to the bottom with the feet that are always there, the feet actually tuck in on the bottom here. You can see right there. And if you want to use them, all you got to do is pull them down like that, and then they're there, ready to connect to any of the mounts. But the new thing that GoPro introduced with the Hero 12 is the 1/4-20 thread mount right here on the bottom. So the nice thing about that mount is it's built into the GoPro. If you want to attach this to a tripod that has a 1/4-20 mounting plate, that mount is right there. So all you have to do is attach it. You can mount it on a tripod, nice and easy. And the Pocket 3 also has the 1/4-20 mount that you can put on the bottom here. Now, if you buy the standard kit, it's going to have a smaller piece like this that has the mount that you just clip on the bottom here. But what I have here is, because I have the creator combo, this is actually also an extra battery. But both pieces have the 1/4-20 mount on the bottom. But if you do want to connect the Pocket 3 to a mount like these right here, you're going to need a 1/4-20 adapter with the feet at the bottom. Next, let's talk about the lens cover on each of these cameras. So 2 of these 4 cameras do have a replaceable lens cover, and the replaceable lens cover is usually going to be about $20. That would be the Hero 12 and the Action 4. Now, in the Hero 12, to remove the lens cover, all you have to do is pull out slightly and twist at an angle, and it pops right off right here. and then you just do the reverse of that to put it back on. And then the Action 4, all you have to do is just unscrew it. So you turn left to loosen it, and it pops right off there. And then to put it back on, just line up the threads, and you turn to the right until it's tight. So if you're doing a lot of intense action and you're worried about breaking the lens cover, the good thing is the Hero 12 and Action 4 both have a replaceable one, and it doesn't cost much to replace it. The Ace Pro, on the other hand, does not have a replaceable lens cover, not officially. There is a way to theoretically pop this off, but Insta360 does not appear to sell a replacement, so if you broke it, you would still have to send it to them. However, Insta360 has stated that if you break this lens cover within the first year of owning the camera, they will do a free replacement of the lens cover. The Pocket 3 doesn't really have a lens cover. It's this lens right here on top of the gimbal, because the Pocket 3 is a camera built into a gimbal. So if you did end up breaking the lens on the Pocket 3, you definitely have to send it to DJI for repair. The Pocket 3 is not necessarily meant for intense action, which brings me to my next topic of discussion. Which of these cameras is the best one for action? So if you're doing activities like downhill skiing, mountain biking, or scuba diving, then 3 of these cameras will work well for that, but one of these should probably be marked off the list, and that would be the Pocket 3. The Pocket 3 is not designed or marketed for intense action sports, but the Pocket 3 does shine in many other realms, which I'm going to talk about next. So for action sports and adventures, these 3 cameras are all very capable and very good for those. The Hero 12, the Action 4, and the Ace Pro, they all have a solid build quality. They're all able to be mounted on a variety of mounts. They're all rated for about the same depth underwater, both with and without waterproof case. Though do take note if you're like me and you like to use the special pass-through doors on some of these, like this one on the Hero 12 and this one on the Ace Pro. These doors do compromise the waterproof quality of these cameras. So if you leave them on there, these cameras are no longer waterproof. So make sure to put the stock door back on these if you're going to have them underwater. But there are many, many more specific features on these 3 cameras that will distinguish them from each other. And you'll want to know those when it comes to making a decision on which one is the absolute best for you. We'll get into those more in a moment. But first, let's talk about what is the Pocket 3 actually best for. If you want a camera for vlogging, travel vlogging, concerts, family get-togethers, or simply talking to the camera, stationary, basically any use case where you're not subjecting a camera to intense action like downhill skiing, mountain biking, or scuba diving like I mentioned before, then the Pocket 3 is a really good choice for you. In fact, if you are looking for a camera for anything other than that intense action, I highly recommend the Pocket 3. Here's why. One of the key features of the Pocket 3 is it does have a large 1-inch sensor. A sensor is much larger than the sensors on these cameras. We'll talk about sensor size a little bit later. But that 1-inch sensor does help you film really good quality. It lets a lot of light into the camera. And the Pocket 3, because it's a gimbal, so it has entirely mechanical stabilization, this does really well in low light, because you don't have to worry about that jitter and ghosting that you can have with these 3 cameras in low light. The Pocket 3 also has autofocus capabilities, which is really nice because you can separate a subject, like a human or an object, from the background. So you can get that nice background blur and bokeh, but you can have your subject in focus. So the Pocket 3 really shines in that area. These 3 cameras, on the other hand, do not have the same autofocusing capabilities as the Pocket 3. With these cameras, it's going to be that static focus, and you can't really separate a subject from the background with these 3 cameras. That doesn't mean you can't use these for vlogging. These can also be perfectly good choices for vlogging, depending on what you're looking to get. But the Pocket 3 is really designed for vlogging. That's what it's going to excel with. And if you do want the Pocket 3 for vlogging, I highly recommend getting the Creator Combo. As I mentioned earlier, the Creator Combo comes with this extra battery right here. Then it also has this little tripod mount right here that you can connect at the bottom here. And then you hook this to the Pocket 3. And with the Creator Combo, you also get the DJI Wireless Mic 2. You get a single one of these, but this is a fabulous value. This mic provides 32-bit float audio with internal recording. So you've kind of always got that safety track in case something happens with the wireless connectivity between your mic and your Pocket 3. And you can also basically guarantee that none of your audio gets blown out with that 32-bit float. In addition, you also get this 15mm wide-angle lens that you can magnetically attach to your Pocket 3. So the default frame of view is 20mm on the Pocket 3, but when you attach this, you can take that a little bit wider to 15mm. We'll talk more about the field of views in a little bit, but all of those come included with the Creator Kit, And for $150 extra, I consider it a fabulous value, especially because you get one of these wireless mics and this extra battery right here. Those two alone are easily worth the extra $150. A full vlogging setup for $669 is a great deal. So next, I'm going to talk about the capabilities of each of these with the video quality. And this is going to be the main section I explore because, in general, the biggest use case you're going to have with these cameras is filming video. So knowing where each of these stands out with video and what's similar and what's different is really important to know. So first, let's talk about the max resolution and frame rate on each of these cameras. With the Hero 12, you can get all the way up to 5.3K 60 or 4K 120. On the Osmo Action 4, you can film all the way up to 4K 120. On the Ace Pro, you can film all the way up to 8K 24 or 4K 120. And on the Pocket 3, you can film all the way up to 4K 120. So if you do want a resolution higher than 4K, which if you want to do any cropping or any motion within your footage that requires a little bit of cropping, then you're going to want a camera that has a little bit higher than 4K resolution if you're going to export your video at 4K. Therefore, the Hero 12 and the Ace Pro will stand out in that area. The Hero 12 has 5.3K resolution and the Ace Pro has 8K. Now, the next factor to consider with video is bitrate. And each of these cameras has a slightly different bitrate. And bitrate is important because, in general, it's a good indicator of the quality of the video. So usually a higher bitrate is going to be higher quality video. The Hero 12 has a max bitrate of 120 megabits per second. But if you do run the GoPro Labs firmware, you can adjust the bitrate all the way up to 200 megabits per second. The Action 4 has a max bitrate of 130 megabits per second. The Ace Pro has a maximum bitrate of 170 megabits per second. And the Pocket 3 has a max bitrate of 130 megabits per second. Now, it is worth noting that cameras with higher resolution are usually going to require higher bit rates anyway for that footage to look good. So it does make sense that the Ace Pro has a higher default bit rate. But it is worth noting that the default max bitrate on the Action 4, even though it only goes up to 4K, is 10 megabits per second higher than the max bitrate on the Hero 12. Another key factor that can affect video quality is sensor size in these cameras. Theoretically, a larger sensor also helps the camera perform better in low light. So the Hero 12 has a 1/1.9 inch sensor, which is actually the smallest sensor of these four. The Action 4 has a 1/1.3 inch sensor, and the Ace Pro also has a 1/1.3 inch sensor. So the Action 4 and the Ace Pro both have a slightly bigger sensor than the Hero 12, and their sensor size is identical. And the Pocket 3, as I mentioned before, has a whopping 1 inch sensor. So when it comes to sensor size, the Pocket 3 has a much bigger sensor than the other three cameras here. But it is worth noting that any of these cameras can be configured to record well in low light, despite their sensor size. I've done a lot of playing around with these in low light, and any of them can do well, but I will note it's a little bit easier to get better results on the Ace Pro and the Action 4 in low light than it is with the GoPro. And of course, with the Pocket 3, this is a beast in low light, and a big reason for that is it's mechanically stabilized. So with mechanical stabilization, you don't have to worry about the ghosting and jitter that can happen with EIS, and EIS stands for Electronic Image Stabilization. These three cameras right here all use EIS to stabilize. And the thing about EIS is it does not perform well in low light because the shutter speed gets too slow. And in order for EIS to work properly, it needs each of those individual frames to be a certain shutter speed or faster because they need to be sharp enough for the EIS to put them together and make good-looking footage that doesn't have ghosting or jitter. So in general, what I found with these action cameras here, these three, is they need to have a shutter speed of about 1/200 or faster in order for that EIS to work well. Alternatively, if you turn off stabilization on these three and mount them on a gimbal, you can get good footage in that scenario as well. It is worth noting that none of these three are going to really shine in low light if you're using just the default settings. So of these four, the Pocket 3 is definitely best in low lighting, but if you're looking for the action camera that's best in low lighting, the Ace Pro is the one that I've found is best overall in low lighting. And part of that is because the Ace Pro has an AI algorithm that really helps the low light footage look good, and it helps remove a lot of that noise inside the camera. That doesn't mean you can't do the same thing with the Action 4 and the Hero 12 when editing later on. But if you want good low light footage directly from your camera, the Ace Pro is going to shine in that area more so than these two. So speaking of stabilization on these cameras, as I mentioned, the Pocket 3 of course has mechanical stabilization. So it's physically stabilized, it's not digitally stabilized. But when it comes to stabilization performance in these other three cameras, I find that all of them do well, as long as you're filming in bright enough lighting. So each of these do have a standard stabilization as well as some form of high or boost stabilization. So if you're doing a lot of intense activities, it's a good idea to turn on that boost if you want smoother footage. But I do find each of these lives up to their promise for the stabilization. I don't find any of these three to necessarily be better than the others with stabilization. So if stabilization is a big factor for you, I would consider all three of these about equal with their capabilities for that. So another important characteristic of video quality is bit depth. And what do I mean by bit depth? So bit depth simply states how many possible colors are available in the video footage on these. So three of these four cameras are able to film 10-bit footage. Those would be the Hero 12, the Action 4, and the Pocket 3. And what 10-bit footage does is 10-bit footage gives you over 1 billion possible color shades that are available in your footage. The Ace Pro, on the other hand, you can only film in 8-bit color. And 8-bit color gives 16 million possible color shades. So 16 million versus 1 billion is a significant difference. But with that being said, that doesn't mean that difference is always going to be noticeable. Generally, the way you're going to see 8-bit versus 10-bit is if you have a scene that shows the sky, let's say around sunrise or sunset, you're going to tend to see banding along that gradient of like a dark blue to a light blue. So any scenes where you have a big view of the sky, the 8-bit is going to be noticeable because there's going to be those bands there. But with the 10-bit, it's going to be a more smooth transition along that gradient. You're probably not going to have any banding. So that is an important consideration to keep in mind if a lot of your filming is going to involve a sky or a body of water, anything that has a gradual dark to light gradient. You will probably notice that with the 8-bit, but with the 10-bit, it's going to look a lot smoother and a lot better. Speaking of banding, let's talk about sharpness and noise settings on each of these cameras. Each of these cameras does allow you to adjust the sharpness inside the camera from low all the way up to high. I like to shoot in low when I'm filming because I like to add sharpness later on if I want to, but I don't like to have too high of sharpness baked into the video because I personally don't feel like that looks good. But if you like higher sharpness, you do have that option on these. And if you're like me and like lower sharpness, you have that option as well. In addition, some of these cameras do allow you to adjust the noise level. And what I mean by noise is I mean that digital grain that's in the footage or not in the footage. Each of these cameras has an algorithm inside that does denoising for you automatically. And some of these do allow you to adjust that denoising. So if you want less denoising in the camera, if you want to denoise later on when you're editing, some of these have that option available. Alternatively, one of these does not have that option available. So on the Action 4 and the Pocket 3, there is a setting where you can adjust the noise. You can do from -2, which would be the lowest noise reduction happening in these cameras. That also means it'll produce the noisiest footage out of camera. But if you have a plugin or a means of removing the noise later on when editing that you feel like is better than what's built into these cameras, you'd probably want to select that -2. Alternatively, for the most noise reduction happening inside the camera, you can go all the way up to +2 on these. Now, the Hero 12 does not have noise reduction by default built into the default menu, but if you run GoPro Labs, there is a noise reduction QR code that you can use where you can adjust that noise reduction and fine-tune it to your liking. The Ace Pro, on the other hand, does not have a setting where you can adjust the noise reduction. However, Insta360 does have a nice algorithm inside this camera that does do a lot of AI noise reduction. And I have found it does work pretty well, especially in low lighting, and it seems to produce nice and smooth footage that still has the level of detail there that I want. Sometimes when there's too much denoising, it can look kind of soft and smooth and not look the best, but I do find the denoising algorithm inside the Ace Pro to be pretty good. Next, let's talk about the digital lens or field of view options on each of these cameras. So first of all, with the Hero 12, you do have a bunch of different options, and I actually like the way GoPro does this. So they provide a hyper view, super view, wide, linear plus horizon leveling, and linear plus horizon lock. These digital lens options do vary depending on resolution and frame rate that you're in, but one of the things I really like about the Hero 12, it is possible to do that 45-degree horizon leveling and that 360-degree horizon lock as high as 5.3K 30. So the ability to do 360-degree horizon lock in a 5.3K resolution is pretty amazing. Of these four cameras, GoPro really is the best when it comes to digital lens options. You can really fine-tune it to what you want. And none of these other cameras allows you to get that high of a resolution with the horizon lock straight out of the camera. The Action 4 offers 4 main field of view options. These are ultra wide, wide, standard D-warp, and narrow. In addition, under the rock steady settings on here, you can enable the horizon balance or the horizon lock. And the horizon lock is called horizon steady on the Action 4, but it is worth noting that you can only enable that horizon steady 360 degree lock in the 2.7K resolution or lower. So you don't have that available in the 4K resolution, which is kind of a bummer, especially when you can do that in the Hero 12 at 5.3K. The Ace Pro has 4 main field of view options. These are Action View, Ultra Wide, D-Warp, and FPV. If you film in the free frame mode on here, you can add the horizon leveling or the horizon lock later on, but you can't get that straight out of the footage in the camera. It does require you to import that footage into the Insta360 app on your phone or the Insta360 Studio app on your computer. Then you can do that and export it. And it's also worth noting you can only use the free frame mode up to 4K 60. You can't use the free frame mode in the 8K resolution. The Pocket 3, on the other hand, keeps it quite simple. You have simply one field of view available, and that is the default 20mm field of view. The nice thing about that is I don't find any fisheye effect in that. It looks really good. If you're filming buildings and you want the straight edges, that also looks good. There's none of that bowing and curvature in there. And there's no real distortion of human subjects, which is great. If you do pop on the wide angle 15mm lens here, you are going to see a little bit of fisheye and a little bit of softness at the edges. So next, let's talk about color grading. If you're someone who likes to color grade that footage later on and really bring out your own look to that footage, each of these cameras has a lot of variety in what they offer or don't offer. With the Hero 12, GoPro did introduce a new color profile, and that color profile is called GP Log. So on older GoPros, before the 12, there was a color profile called Flat, and that profile was nice. It was nice and flat footage. You could bring out a lot of detail later on. It left you a lot of room to grade that footage. And GP Log, I find, is even better than Flat. You have even more of a range in the highlights, shadows, the contrast, and the colors. And GoPro has kind of been fine-tuning and refining that. There has been a couple firmware updates that have really made that profile a lot more useful. Initially, you couldn't go above 400 max ISO with that profile, so that kind of limited you to really bright lighting for that. But GoPro has made it a lot better, so props to GoPro on that. In addition, GoPro does also have an HDR profile on here, and that does most of the color work inside the camera, but I found the HDR does look good as well. And of course, you can do the normal profile on here too. The Action 4 does have a normal and D-Log-M color profile, and the D-Log-M is nice if you want to grade the footage later on. The D-Log-M doesn't have quite as much range as a GP Log does, but you can still get good results with that, and it is very gradable 10-bit footage. The Ace Pro is the weakest of these when it comes to grading later on, and that's because the Ace Pro is first of all 8-bit, which really doesn't allow you much room to grade the footage. And the color profile that's the flattest on here, it's called Flat, but it's really not that flat. You can do a little bit of grading later on, but it's very minimal. I find that in general, other than adding some saturation later on to saturate it a little bit more, there's not really much else you can do with the Ace Pro footage. Now, just like the Action 4, the Pocket 3 does also have the D-Log-M color profile, which is great. The footage comes out beautiful for grading on here. But it also has that HLG color profile. So if you want to do an HDR workflow, that HLG is critical for that. And it really produces some incredible footage from the Pocket 3. But even if you don't want to do an HDR workflow later, if you just want to take that HLG and use the standard Rec 709 color profile, the HLG footage has a lot of dynamic range in it. And I think it looks extra good when outputting it as Rec 709. So keep that in mind. If you like HLG or you know about HLG, the Pocket 3 does have that. And personally, I think the HLG does look a little bit better than the D-Log-M, but both look great from the Pocket 3. So if you want to grade footage later on, the Hero 12 and the Pocket 3 do offer you the most flexibility. So one other important component of video footage is gyro data. And what that gyro data is that's data inside these cameras that are detecting how the camera's moving from side to side, up and down, forwards, backwards. And when you can pull that data from the camera, you can use that later on to stabilize your footage in post-production if you don't want to use the EIS on these cameras. Now, the Pocket 3, of course, does not have the gyro data, because it is mechanically stabilized and it's already that physical stabilization built into your footage. But with these three cameras, there is varying degrees of gyro data available. With the Hero 12, that gyro data is available in pretty much any mode on this camera. So any video, combination of resolution or frame rate that you select, there should be gyro data there available for you to use later on to stabilize that footage. You can use a program like GyroFlow, or you can use the optional $99 Real Steady add-on in the GoPro Player PC or Mac app. And that Real Player does a really nice job stabilizing the footage. The Action 4 does have gyro data available, but it's in very select specific combinations of resolution and frame rate. So if you turn off a rock steady on the camera, the Action 4 will tell you what combinations of settings will provide the gyro data. You're going to have to be in the wide field of view, and then generally if you're in the wide field of view, most resolution and frame rates will work for the gyro data, but not all of them. The Ace Pro does provide gyro data, but it's in the freeform mode only. So it is pretty limited with where that data is available. You do have to be in the freeform mode on the camera to even have that gyro data available. But the Insta360 PC, Mac, and smartphone apps, those do allow you a lot of flexibility with how you reframe that footage later on. And I do find the Insta360 app to be good for that. So as I mentioned before, filming videos with these cameras is the core use case that most of us will have with them. So that's why I went into such detail on all of these different options and settings on these so that you can get a good feel of which one will do best for video for you. But what if you want to use these cameras for other things such as time lapses, night lapses, or photos? Let's talk about that next. So first, let's talk about time lapses on each of these cameras. Now, one of the important components of getting a really good time lapse is being able to manually set each of the three components of the exposure triangle. Those, of course, are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Now, all four of these cameras have a static aperture, so already right there you have one value that's static that you can't change. But what about shutter speed and ISO? Now, for shutter speed and ISO, it is possible to set static values for each of these on these cameras, but there are some limitations. So let's talk about those limitations and how those will affect your time lapse. First of all, with the Hero 12, if you're in the default time lapse mode, you actually cannot set a static shutter value. You have to be in the photo interval mode in order to do that. So that right there does limit you to only creating time lapses that have the photo output from the camera. And you would then need to put those photos together into a time lapse and then export it as a video later on from a video editor. But even in that interval photo mode, you are quite limited with what shutter speeds you can set. You can only go as slow as 1/125 for the shutter speed, which is kind of unfortunate because ideally you want as slow of a shutter speed as possible in the time lapse mode. You want to get those really nice frames that flow nicely together and are not really sharp and jarring with a time lapse. But you can set that static value. And of course, with ISO, you can set the static value as well on the Hero 12. It's also worth noting you can only get either video or photo time lapse, one or the other. You can't get both at the same time in the Hero 12 like you can with some of these other cameras. So do note that it's either or when you're doing a time lapse on the Hero 12. But the video time lapse on the Hero 12, you can get that in up to 5.3K resolution, which is really nice. In addition, the photos that you can capture on here, those are 27 megapixel. So that does offer some nice flexibility later on if you want to do some cropping or motion in your time lapse. The Hero 12 does provide a nice high resolution for that. On the Action 4, you do have full control over the shutter speed in the time lapse mode, as well as the ISO. And the shutter speed, you can slow it down nice and slow on the Action 4. In addition, on the Action 4, you can also create a video and photo time lapse simultaneously. So you can have your Action 4 going and recording a video time lapse while it's also putting the individual photos onto your micro SD card. That way later on, if you want to take those raw files and make an even more detailed, fine-tuned time lapse, you can definitely do that. It is worth noting that the time lapses in the Action 4 will be in a 4K resolution for the video, but the photo resolution will only be 10 megapixels. So that does limit you to how much cropping and motion you can do in the time lapse later on, because 10 megapixels does break down pretty quickly when you zoom in on that. So keep that in mind. On the Ace Pro, you can also do a photo and video time lapse at the same time, and you can also control the shutter speed manually as well as the ISO. But the shutter speed can only go as slow as 2 seconds, which is generally going to be fine for a daytime time lapse. But do note, you can only go down to as slow as 2 seconds for the shutter speed. Now, if you're capturing time lapses in the Ace Pro in the default time lapse mode, do note that The video is going to be limited to 4K. So even though this camera can do 8K video, for the time lapse, you can only get as high as 4K. But if you do use the interval photo mode on the Ace Pro, you can get photos that have a whopping 48 megapixel resolution with a full photo resolution of 8064 by 6048. So those are nice high resolution photos. Those will allow for a lot of zooming and motion capabilities in your time lapse later on if you wish to do so. On the Pocket 3, there's kind of a nice blend of time lapse options on here. You can do video and photo both at the same time. Do note that the shutter speed, you can set it manually, but you can only go as slow as 1 second. Again, that's fine for daytime time lapses. That should be no problem, but you are limited to 1 second. And what I like about the Pocket 3 is you can also do those motion time lapses. So you can configure the camera on here to move left to right over the span of 10 minutes. You can also set up custom waypoints to have the camera move in a certain pattern. So that's very cool on the Pocket 3. Now, the photo output is pretty low resolution on the Pocket 3. It's only 9.4 megapixels. They are DNGs. They do look nice. They have low noise in them, which is great. Part of that's because of that pixel size, but that does limit how much zooming or motion you can have in the time lapse later on. But another nice feature of the Pocket 3 is you can also do a vertical time lapse. So you can have the camera in the vertical mode here. This is great if you want to do a time lapse for a YouTube short or an Instagram. Anything with that vertical format, you can do that vertical time lapse in 2.7K resolution. In addition, I find that the Pocket 3, because of the larger sensor, it does a particularly good job with a sunrise or sunset time lapse. You get that nice fade from darkness to light or light to darkness with a lot of detail still there in the footage and not a lot of noise. Now, each of these cameras does also have their own version of a hyperlapse, and I find the hyperlapse capabilities to be pretty good on all of these. I don't find any of them to be really bad or any of them to really stand out from one another. I will note, though, that the Hero 12, you can do a hyperlapse in 5.3K, so the resolution is going to be higher, versus these other cameras, you can only do a hyperlapse up to 4K. Even the Ace Pro, even though it has 8K video, hyperlapse can only be done up to 4K. And each of these does have different options that allow you to select the speed of your hyperlapse, and they have their own default that you can select as well. So if you like to do a lot of hyperlapses, any of these cameras will serve you well for that. Next, let's talk about night lapses. So for night lapses, two of these cameras I highly recommend for night lapses, and they do really well. The first one is the Hero 12. The other one is the Ace Pro. The Hero 12 and Ace Pro both do a great job of capturing a lot of detail in the night sky. They capture a lot of the bright stars as well as some of the dimmer stars. You can pretty easily see a lot of constellations in the sky when using the Hero 12 or the Ace Pro. In addition, the Hero 12 and the Ace Pro both have their own version of star trails built into the camera. Star trails is a really neat mode, and having it built into the camera where it will record it inside the camera is very cool. Now, the Hero 12 does have several different options with star trails, like short, long, and max, whereas the Ace Pro is more limited with those options. And the Hero 12 also has some additional night modes. Those modes include light painting and vehicle lights. So if you want to do a lot of nighttime stuff with your camera and you want to have some of those neat effects built in, the Hero 12 is a great option for that. Now, Insta360 does have some of those built into its app, so you can do some nighttime stuff on here, import it into the app, and then do it later on. But if you want it straight out of the camera, the Hero 12 is going to be king for anything night lapse related. Now, with the Pocket 3, you can do some nighttime stuff with it, and the larger sensor helps. But one of the key limitations is with the manual settings, you can only go down to a shutter speed as slow as 1 second. And really for night lapsing, you need to be able to get to 15 seconds, 20 seconds, or even 30 to really get a nice view of the night sky. However, if you depend on auto on the Pocket 3, so if you set your exposure settings to auto and your interval is set to like 20 seconds or 30 seconds, the Pocket 3 will go slower with the shutter speed than the 1 second. But the problem is you're at the mercy of auto. So you're depending on the auto to do what you want it to do. And I found it's kind of hit or miss. It doesn't necessarily do the best with that. It can do well, but the auto is also going to constantly be adjusting that shutter speed. And that can create a lot of flicker in those night lapses. So unfortunately, the Pocket 3 just really isn't dependable right now for night lapses. My hope is that DJI will enable the shutter speed to be manually set to a slower shutter speed, such as at least 10 seconds, maybe 15, that would be great. My thought is DJI might be able to do that with a future firmware update. That's what I'm hoping. So hopefully DJI will do that. Now the Action 4 is the one camera here that I just cannot recommend for night lapses, and it's kind of unfortunate. I really just think it needs some fine tuning by DJI to be good for that. But I've done night lapses with the Action 4 a lot. I've tried to get this camera to do well with night lapses, and I just haven't been able to get it anywhere comparable to the Hero 12 or the Ace Pro. What I find with the Action 4 is it will focus on those few brightest objects in the sky, but the rest of the sky is just kind of dark. And then if you try to bring out that detail, you just get a lot of noise, and there's just not a lot of stars there. So unfortunately for the Action 4, if you want to do night lapses a lot, I don't recommend the Action 4 for that. In addition, the Action 4 does not have any special night modes built into it. The only night mode available is night lapse. Finally, let's talk about photos. So if you want to take photos with these cameras, each of them have a lot of variants, and I want to go through that with you briefly here. First, let's talk about the megapixel size for the photos from each of these. So the max size you can get from the Hero 12 is 27 megapixels. The Action 4 is 10 megapixels. The Ace Pro is a whopping 48 megapixels. And the Pocket 3 is 9.4 megapixels. So megapixels really aren't everything. You can still get a great photo out of each of these, even the ones with the lower megapixels. Megapixels really only matter if you want to do a lot of cropping on that photo later on, or if you want to do some type of large print of that photo. If you want to do a large print or a lot of cropping, then the Ace Pro and the Hero 12 are going to give you the best photos for that. But if you want to do a lower light photo, then the Action 4 and the Pocket 3 are actually going to do pretty well with that. And that's because that lower megapixel means each individual pixel has a larger size, and larger size pixels tend to look less noisy and grainy in lower light. They tend to look a lot better. So keep that in mind, that the Action 4 and the Pocket 3 are actually better for low light photos, but you still wouldn't want to do a large print or a lot of zooming on those photos because of their lower megapixel count. Now, as far as photo modes and options on here, each camera does have their own raw output version for the photo. So you can get the DNG or the .gpr file, and then you can edit that photo later on and kind of bring out a little bit extra detail, which is nice. In addition, each camera does have its own super photo or HDR photo. Basically, the camera doing auto of what it thinks is best for that photo situation. Each one has their own settings for that, and each one does do well with their own version. I found that auto photo to look pretty good out of all of these cameras. So in a nutshell, all four of these cameras do a good job with photos. I don't think any of them necessarily stand out from the other, as photos are not necessarily supposed to be the strength of each of these cameras, and they're not. But the only thing to keep in mind is that cropping or large print, if that's something you're going to do a lot, then you want to consider the Hero 12 or the Ace Pro for that. Finally, let's talk about the app that each of these manufacturers offers. Starting with GoPro, GoPro offers the Quick app, and the Quick app you can run on your phone, and GoPro has recently released the Quick app for Mac as well. From what I've seen, that app does look pretty limited so far, but maybe GoPro will be adding functionality later on. But the Quick app on a smartphone, it does do a good job. There are a lot of features in there. You can do pretty good edits in there. You can do slow motion with the footage, some of the more advanced things if you are a GoPro subscriber. In addition, the Quick app does allow you to back up as much GoPro footage as you want to in the original quality of the footage. So if you want a cloud backup of your footage, that's a great feature with the Quick app as long as you're a GoPro subscriber. GoPro does also have the GoPro Player app for both PC and Mac, along with that $99 Real Steady add-on that you can use to stabilize the GoPro footage later on using the gyro data. So if you're going to do a lot of stabilizing of your GoPro footage, I highly recommend that GoPro Player app with the $99 add-on. DJI does offer the DJI Mimo app, so that app can be used with the Action 4 and the Pocket 3. This does allow for some limited video and photo editing, and it can do a pretty good job with those. So for any clips where you just want to do a quick edit of those and then upload them to social media or share with family or friends, the app's perfectly capable for that. It doesn't have as many bells and whistles as the GoPro apps, but the app is more than capable for those quick shares. For the Ace Pro, Insta360 has their Insta360 smartphone app, and they also have their free Insta360 Studio app for PC or Mac. The Insta360 app has a lot of bells and whistles built into it, and it does have a lot of those newer AI features where you can play around with your video, and you can do like some sketch videos, some cartoon type videos. You can do a lot of cool effects with your videos if you're into that. the Insta360 app does have a lot of good capabilities on the smartphone. In addition, the Insta360 Studio app, you can do a lot in that later on, like add stabilization, you can reframe it, and then you can export your clips to edit in a different video editor. So which of these 4 cameras do you like best and why? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more about the best settings that I recommend for each of these cameras, I do have a playlist for each of these where I have several videos that explore best settings, provide a lot of sample footage, and tell you how I get the very best out of these cameras. I've linked to a couple of those playlists right here.